So in the last video that I did, I talked about theonomy, and the whole point in talking about the theonomy was so that people to understand that the perspective that I have is that whenever we're asking our questions about how we should do this or how we should do that, any particular thing, we can actually always go back to looking at either the moral law application, which would be your motivation, your inner desire for this thing or that thing. So that's how we kind of regulate our inner thoughts. And then your actions can actually be regulated fairly well. If you look at the civil law, you can look at what's permissible and what's not permissible. And so this brings me to the primary thing that I wanted to talk about, which is that the way in which we go about getting married in the Western world is just a trap. It's a trap of sin. It's laying before us all these temptations and just hoping that people don't fall into it or somehow strong enough to resist. One of the things that I think is important is that people do get married. And I'm not really concerned with educating young men about how they should go about getting married, because the system is set up so totally against them. And the ones who control how things happen are typically the parents. They've built the system, they set up the system. So people who are the parents of marriageable age children are really in control of how those children actually get married, at least in circles where there's any kind of familial strength or familial bonds. So in that respect, I'm not trying to naysay and put down people who are doing things to get married that may fall under what I'm about to discuss, but rather young men should be aware of the pitfalls, the dangers, so that as they're going through the process of getting married, they are acutely aware of it, they experience it, and then they can change so that when they are the ones in that position, 20 years from now, they can actually make a system and they can contribute to a efficacious mode of getting married that doesn't have a lot of the pitfalls the current does. So probably the most common American metric for getting married is dating. And dating is essentially going on multiple excursions or spending alone time, typically in public places, but not exclusively, one-on-one to get to know each other. And this has a lot of pitfalls in it. Being unsupervised, alone, oftentimes not in public places, although typically they are. It just opens the door up for sexual immorality. And it doesn't guarantee that they're actually going to come to a reasonable decision either. Because in so many of these situations, the dating aspect, the women are in control of essentially sexuality, and the men are in control of marriage. So the women control when and how sex happens, and the men control when and how marriage happens. And because these two things are interacting in that way, it really makes it difficult for the woman to make a fair trade. She can be tricked very easily into giving up the power that she has, hoping to achieve, the end that the man has the power over, but in the end she just gets played. That's one way it can fail. But another way is they could just not be serious, not actually looking to get married and simply spending time with people. You're not trying to get married. Why are you really even doing that? But for young men who are trying to be upright, there's a lot of temptation in that system built in inherently. Then there's another mode that has become popular with some circles, and that's the courting angle, which is essentially dating, but with extra steps. It's all of the same principles of control, but you have more people to answer to. Typically, you have her parents involved, maybe your parents involved in some of the advice and stuff. But generally, it's the same thing. Go on a date, but you have like a chaperone, so you're not alone. So that does help, but it doesn't fix the issue of where should you actually be at, and how can you manage this. Once the two parties are attracted to each other, it can become very, very difficult for them to resist the temptation of wanting to unite physically. There's a natural sort of duality where mental, spiritual closeness come with physical closeness. So as you're building this relationship, as you get more comfortable with each other on an intellectual, emotional, and spiritual level, then you're also going to want to get together on a physical level. And so constantly doing these dates where there's no progression in the physical touch aspect can be frustrating for everybody, and it can lead to massive failures. This particular methodology has caused people to ask me, well, what is acceptable? Can I hold hands? What about kissing? What about, cuddling, or any number of these other kind of steps in the physical closeness market? And when I had friends asking me this question, then I kind of had to re-examine. This was several years ago now, I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago, where I had to kind of examine what is going to be okay. And so went to the Bible, go to the Bible, because I'm looking at this, I'm going, okay, well, we got to look at what is okay and is not okay in the eyes of God. So then let's figure this out. And it was a very long study in that, because the Bible doesn't have any mention of dating or no mention of these kinds of things. So you end up in some extra texts that are talking about culture. And what you find is that in the Hebrew culture, they had a culture of shame and a culture of honor. And one of the ways you could become dishonored is if a man and a woman were alone. It was just assumed by everyone around them that they were doing the nasty. So then you lose your honor that way, which I thought was interesting. If they're alone, there's no one supervising them. If it could happen, people just assumed it happened. And so that drove people to kind of be out and open in a lot of different situations. But then looking at where the law applies. So I kind of looked at it from the perspective of what does God consider to be fornication? And it's like, okay, well, only the one act is what God considers fornication, the actual, penetrative act, if you will. That's the only one that God considers to be fornication. That is the one where you're punishable, you're amenable. And interestingly enough, the same is true in the case of adultery. And that kind of got me thinking, there are a lot of things that you wouldn't want another guy to do with your wife that fall short of the biblical term for where the death penalty would apply. I mean, kissing is not a death penalty offense. That's not adultery under the biblical standard. So then it's like, well, I still would not want that to happen. So what we find is that God essentially is saying, this one thing is sacred, and everything else, there's no legal standard for. I want to stress the legal aspect of that. There's no civil punishment for anything else. This is the one that invokes the civil punishment, the rest does not. So then it's very easy to say, okay, so anything goes except that, because there's no civil punishment. But obviously we have the moral law, and we know that looking on a woman to lust is, you've already committed it. So we want to avoid even that in the moral sense. But that doesn't help if we don't know where to regulate. Does that mean that when you're dating, everything is okay except the actual act? Is that how we're actually going to take that one? And so that may be the civil attribute, but people ask me what the actual standard is, what you should actually be doing. And what I found is that I came to this conclusion that you should not do anything with your girlfriend or your fiance that you would be uncomfortable if another man did it with your wife. I realize the timeline on that kind of gets confusing. But essentially, you can ask yourself, do I want another man, holding my wife's hand? No? Then you probably shouldn't be holding your girlfriend's hand, because she is not yours yet. So she could be another guy's. You should not be doing that. People say, oh, well, we're definitely going to get married. We're definitely this. I don't care. Until you actually are married, it's not a reality. So no, you shouldn't be holding hands. You shouldn't be kissing. You shouldn't be doing any of those things, because you would be pretty pissed off if a guy did that with your wife. And that's where it starts to get a little crazy, because I would also be pretty upset if my wife and another guy went on a date at a restaurant, or went to a movie, or we're just hanging out a bunch together. So now the whole kind of system comes crashing down. dating in general is just bunk. You wouldn't want a guy treating your wife that way. Why would you let a guy treat your daughter that way? So, oh, well, maybe he'll marry her, blah, blah, blah. You are taking a terrible risk, trusting that is going to pan out the way that you want it to pan out. And you would never take that risk with your wife. And it's not because you trust your wife less than your daughter. It's just inappropriate. There's no propriety there. And that is where I understood why what people started to call curated or arranged marriage is really important and is a essential part of society. If you love your children, you should set them up in circles where the only possible matches that could be made are going to be good matches for them. You don't bring people into your life who have children who are just terrible matches. So as a young man, as I mentioned at the beginning, a young man trying to find a wife today, I'm not trying to ride your case about, going on dates or doing this courtship thing. You have to get married. You have to enter into this stupid, broken system. But think about it when you are going through these. How would you like to set it up for the next generation so they don't have these struggles? One of the biggest goals for me right now is establishing connections with families that are going to have children that can marry my children, so that my kids don't have to search around and go on a bunch of dates. Instead, we can just say, hey, which of these you seem compatible? Me and another father can say, look, which of our kids, seem to be working well together? Which of them are matched up in, some of their goals? And if you're hanging out with people who are like-minded to you and you've vetted your whole system, you're going to make it a lot easier on your children trying to find spouses, because growing up with people means you understand them, you know what they're about. There's no mysteries. You don't have to ask a whole bunch of questions. One of the pitfalls, going back to dating, dating is the worst for this. The pitfall is never discussing anything of value. The primary focus is for the man anyway, is trying to be attractive enough that the woman will have you. And for the woman is trying to seem as much like a blank page as possible so the guy will take you and marry you. They don't tend to discuss a lot of things. I know many couples that have got married never even talked about whether they wanted to have children at all, how many children they wanted to have. Haven't discussed anything about religion, where they come from, their backgrounds, haven't discussed how they want to live, morality of, centralized banking, which is, maybe that one's a deep one, but they haven't discussed any of this stuff. And it leads to really, really bad setups. So in that way, dating is the worst. I've seen some better stuff come out of the courtship area, but it's not great. It's not awesome. Typically, parents do add questions that kids should be asking, but so many of the times that I've witnessed this, the children just get carried away with each other, and so the questions are just kind of blank. This is not actually determinate in any fashion. Whereas with the idea of an arranged marriage, you can ask your children what's important to them without having a particular person in mind. And you can teach them the things that are important to them when they're very small, so that they don't have these weird, bizarre expectations or, strange out-of-pocket desires, by spending more time with them. And then likewise, by watching other families, how they raise their children, you're going to know better how those families are going to interact with your family. And you can figure out what's going to be best for them. You don't have to approach this from a hateful perspective, which so many people hear arranged marriage and they just constantly think of some Saudi prince marrying a 12-year-old girl. But the reality is, who better to decide what's best for their children than their parents? If parents hate their children, who they marry is the least of their worries. In our society that promotes running away from home and individuality, anyone could easily get away from their family. It's promoted. So having you as a parent able to protect your child is very, very important. And if you love your children, you should arrange for them the best things. I think it was Yaskei first said, at least to my knowledge, the two greatest challenges facing the new generations is, what am I going to do and who am I going to marry? If you can eliminate even one of those, you are so far ahead of the curve. So this talk here is mostly towards young men. You need to get your stuff squared away. I understand it's difficult trying to find people that want to get married. But once you are there, just remember what it feels like to struggle through this broken system and to have temptation laid at your doorstep left and right. And remember that, there are standards for how this stuff works. And so staying on top of that, I think, is really important. And when you are a parent, you'll be able to help your children better when you take the time now to figure out what's so frustrating about this system and, really take it apart. That's it for this episode. The next one, I think I'm going to talk about something a little different. Let's kind of pivot. If you didn't like this video, I don't care.